I will tell you that in areas that I'm most concerned about with respect to the future, cyber is at the top, because I think it's an area that doesn't have any boundaries, it doesn't have any rules, it's both state-sponsored as well as non-state-sponsored entities. I mean, easily described or categorized as hackers, and the potential is huge. And so President Bush made a huge investment in cyber. President Obama has continued that investment. We've actually come a long way in the military side. We've stood up a command in the last year that I think is a critical command for this, not just inside the military, although certainly that's the main focus, but in terms of the engine that understands this and has more potential from my perspective than any other entity in our country. I think for us as a country, though, it becomes, it's going to be a challenging issue to resolve, because it will butt up right against our own civil liberties and freedoms. And as we saw post 9/11 with what steps needed to be taken in terms of being able to protect ourselves, I think there will be more of that in the cyber world because of the threat that's there, and I see it routinely. So an area of great growth, I think, not just for the military, but I think for our country. And there are three domains. There's the domain of what I call the .mil domain, which is the military. There's the .gov domain, which is our government, but there's the .com domain, and quite frankly, I think we're more vulnerable there than anywhere else. And there are a lot of people that get this, not just in the government. There are a lot of private companies, private entities that understand this, and we're going to have to, and there are a lot of legislators that understand it and are working hard to understand it better. But we've got to centerline this, we've got to put it right in front of us, because it's not going away. Pakistan is a nuclear-capable country, and they have been as a part of a nuclear arms race between them and India for an extended period of time. I worry a great deal because the terrorists are very focused on trying to get their hands on a nuclear weapon. That is something that is aspirational to them. We're very focused on it. The whole proliferation piece is of great concern. I spoke earlier of Iran. I think Iran, with a nuclear capability, generates a nuclear arms race in that region. And just looking at events in the course of the last 2 or 3 months in that region, much less historically, what does that mean for other countries then as they seek to protect themselves by matching that capability? And in addition to the major weapons capability, it's the proliferation of the technology, which Iran supports, North Korea supports, and others. And that weapon in the hands of terrorists is something they seek, and I don't have to tell you where that could go. I don't see that as an existential threat to our country, meaning certainly we wouldn't and couldn't be annihilated by it, but certainly there is the capability and the developing capacity to kill thousands and thousands of us, which is one of the reasons that we're so focused on that. And it's not just about us if Iran gets that capability. Iran is very specifically, the leadership, Ahmadinejad, is focused on the elimination of Israel, who's a great ally of ours, for example. And that's just one example of the dangers that are out there. So we spend a lot of time focused on that as well. Now, our main effort in Afghanistan over the last 2 years, 18 months, has been in the south. It's been Helmand and Kandahar. And Helmand is the poppy growing capital of the world. And yet, with the exception of one area in Sangin up in the northeast of Helmand, which the whole province used to be run by the Taliban. The Taliban are just about out. And if you use the example, if you go to Marja right now, which is in the south, which is the first place we really added troops in the summer of '09 and went in. And the campaign there started in February of 10. Sorry, we added troops in the vicinity of Marja later than the summer of '09. It really turned security around. The bazaar's humming in ways that many people couldn't have imagined. Their views are pretty good. If you go to a place where security doesn't exist, their views are pretty bad right now in terms of our mission. And certainly President Karzai, rightfully so, has emphasized consistently the whole issue of civilian casualties. I mean, our strategy is to protect the people. It's hard to convince an individual or a family they're being protected when they're dying, you know, at our hands, even if it's by accident. So that's why we've taken so much care to prevent civilian casualties. We're at a time in Afghanistan of great change, and I think there are varied views in terms of where we are just because it's chaotic and it's changing, and I think it's changing for the good with respect to the overall strategy. So I think you're going to continue to get reports on both sides of how we're doing over the course of the next year or so. I have a good friend of mine who will remain nameless that thinks I should also become the green chairman. The reason I say that is because I think it speaks to the growing concern we all have with respect to that. And all of our military services have taken significant initiatives over the course of the last decade to both conserve and to go green. Now, there are a couple of characteristics of us. Sometimes it takes us a long time to figure it out. And there would be those that argue in this case that maybe has been the case. But we also, once we figure something out, we're pretty good at doing it. So we have thrown the rudder over, if you will. The ship is starting to turn. It's a big ship. It always takes time to turn. But I don't think there's any question that we are headed in the right direction with respect to that. And I'll use two examples. The Air Force, not too long ago, started flying some of its major aircraft on synthetic fuels. We have, as early as 2004, if you look at the supply lines when you put a combat force in Iraq, whether it's Marine or Army, the trucks, the fuel, the water, all of that the support infrastructure is huge. That actually endangers lives when we have that. And the Marine Corps, 2004, 2005, started looking at motivated, and life and death will do this, motivated by the knowledge that they knew if they got this right, there would be fewer lives exposed and therefore fewer lives lost, started to look at different organic ways to air condition themselves, for example, and to reduce those supply lines. And all of those are headed in the green direction. I've seen it in the Navy, and I've seen it in the Army as well. So I think, as I said, the rudder's over. We know we still have a lot to do, but all of us believe in that, first of all. Secondly, the world is changing. I don't have to tell you the polar ice cap is melting. That opens up space, and it's back to things that drive me. When you look at what's happening somewhere in the world, follow the money. There's a lot of money being invested up north. It's the shortest transit lane from east to west or west to east. It's going to open up. That will bring tension. Who owns the mineral rights? Who owns the area, if anybody does at all, in an area that we hadn't paid much attention to in the past. There are fish migrating from the northwest of our country permanently up into that part of the world. And our Coast Guard, a Coast Guard commandant by the name of Thad Allen, brought that to my attention 4 or 5 years ago. So it's an area that we're paying a lot more attention to, and that's not just lip service. It's a very serious effort. Well, when I look at the next 10 or 15 years, I oftentimes get asked about the future of our military. My view of that is, if we, even in budget times that become very, very stark, my view of that, this is the most combat experienced, combat hardened military we've had in the history of our country. And if we are able to, over the course of the next decade, retain the best young officers and the best young non-commissioned officers, we'll be just fine as a military. If we don't, we will have a very difficult time, much more difficult time than if we do. So I'm very focused on that. I think if we get it right for our people and their families, and as we look to the future, we'll be just fine. In the budget environment in which we find ourselves, which I think will actually get worse before it gets better, the priorities that Secretary Gates and I have set are make sure we get it right for our people, make sure we fund the wars that we're in, our operations. Both he and I refuse to send someone into combat that isn't properly trained or properly equipped. That's two of the pots of money, people and operations. And the third pot is the stuff that we buy. And I think we're going to have to slow that down. We're going to have to be very, very specific about what we buy and how much we're willing to pay for it, as we looked at times where it's taken too long and too much money to develop systems that have been on the books for too long. Probably in that part of the budget, we will slow things down based on what the overall resources are. That said, we're reaching a point, given the size of our military and the resources that we have, and the continuing emergence of crisis to respond to. If I were standing here 3 months ago and someone would have made the assumption, hey, in 3 months from now, Chairman, it'll be Egypt and Japan, I would have said, I don't think I agree with that assumption. But it does speak to the uncertainty that's out there, the call that we have, and the requirements that we constantly are called on to have to fill. I think your challenge as a young officer over the next 10 years will involve transitioning from a force that's out of the war environment, the combat environment that we've been in, to a time where it won't be that the Army won't deploy, because I think the Army will continue to deploy. We live in a time that those of us in the senior leadership believe is a time of persistent conflict. Hard to know where that's going to be. But by and large, I think we'll be home a lot longer. You are now tasked to figure out what garrison leadership is. Don't take this personally, but you don't have a clue what garrison leadership is, because you and your contemporaries back to the class of 2002 have been doing nothing but getting ready to go to the fight. So what is garrison leadership? And I think those who have been in combat, and this is what they've done for such a significant period of time, I think NCOs and young leaders like you will be challenged to train to a level that keeps the initiative and the adrenaline and the focus that occurs after every war. And I think these wars, over the course of the next 10 years, these wars will end. There's no question about it. So I think your challenge is going to is to lead at a time where the pace is vastly reduced in terms of time both on deployment and between deployments. And the challenge is, quite frankly, I talked about the third ID, 4 or 5 deployments for major brigades who've deployed since 2003. If you are a special operator, I've talked to dozens of them who've deployed somewhere between 15 and 25 times. And all of that, back to the family piece, we have asked our families to sacrifice and absorb a lot of that, and a lot of that is just blocked out. I think, we've put things in closets and compartments that we're now going to have to unpack. So for you, I think in garrison, you're going to be dealing with a lot of those challenges that we just sort of put away, figured out how we're going to gut our way through them. We've done that, but our families and our lives have changed in ways that I don't think we understand. So dealing with that, whether it's the mental health, the physical health, just getting some downtime is going to be a huge challenge for you and your generation.